Hello, Almitra. How are you today?
Fine, thank you.
I really look forward to these weekly chats. There's so much to learn from you each week. And today, I think we want to talk about waste to energy. A few months ago, the residents of Delhi were agitated as there was a proposed expansion of the waste to energy plant from 25 megawatts to 45 megawatts. You must have read it in the paper.
Yeah, in the middle of a residential area, Sukhdev Vihar.
Absolutely. There are multiple residential areas, there are hospitals, there are schools in that area. Now, many people who maybe live outside that particular area do not fully understand what waste to energy means or how it really works. So, may we request you today to break it down for us so that everybody listening to you can understand exactly what waste to energy is all about, and does it really generate energy, at what cost, at what expense, and is it really meaningful in our times today when we are talking about the quality of air, the toxicity of our living habitat? Please share your thoughts on this.
First, a definition of waste to energy. There are different ways to get energy out of waste, which has some calorific value. And if you think about it, even composting, and compost is a form of waste to energy because the compost can replace half the chemical fertilizer needed, which depends a lot on energy to produce the urea and other things. But that's stretching it a bit. The common ways of waste to energy, one is biological, anaerobic. Gobar gas is what most people would relate to, where in the absence of oxygen, when carbon-containing organic wastes decompose, they will produce carbon monoxide and methane, which can be burnt. And that gas can either be used for heating, ideally, where you get 100 out of 100 bang for your buck from the calories, or convert waste to electricity, which is transportable energy. But for every 100 potential calories in methane, you only get 30% max as electricity energy. So there's a lot of loss, and all that loss is in the form of heat because you have to burn the methane, use it to generate steam. So there is heat from the burning, heat from the steam, which after turning a turbine, cools down, and that is all wasted heat. We'll come to that later on. The other, normally this is now referred to as biomethanation or biogas. When we talk of waste to energy, its meaning has shrunk mainly to burn technologies, which go by different names like incineration, which is in the presence of some oxygen, pyrolysis, which is in the absence of oxygen, and they talk of fusion and other exotic things which have not at all been proven for municipal waste. These are burn technologies, and that's what I'd like to mainly talk about when we are talking of waste to energy. Now, if you look at Indian waste, it's got about 75% food waste, organics, which have about 80-85% moisture in them, like a rotten tomato or something. So the moisture content of Indian waste with such a high organic content has a lot of moisture, and you can't burn that in either by incineration, pyrolysis, gasification, or anything else until you have put in energy to dry the waste and remove all the moisture so that what's left can burn. The remainder, the combustible part, which would be the recyclables in mixed waste, are not as high calorie as they could be because a lot of the best, Karak plastics and PET bottles and things like that are all removed for recycling as they should be. So relatively poorer combustibles are left behind. And Indian waste, because of our dusty streets and our habit of picking up, road dust along with leaves and scattered plastic wrappers and things, it has a high percent of inerts. There's no energy in dust and stones and debris and so on. So the overall calorific value of mixed waste is so poor and its moisture content so high that by the time you have heated it to drive out the moisture and then tried to extract energy from the combustible part, in the process heating up the dust and bricks and so on, which then cool down and that's also wasted heat. And the energy for crushing, conveying, feeding the boilers, this, that, which is all process energy. It leaves you really very little surplus energy. All the waste to energy plants that are being talked about, promoted, tried in India, even the MNES, former Ministry of Ministry of Non-Conventional Energy Sources, and now called MNRE, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy. They all admit that all the burn technologies are driven by the West. And we need to understand, why do they work in the West, or why did they work and not here? One thing is that our wastes are 75% organics, either pre or post cooked food waste, whereas in the West, the organic content of their waste is hardly 16 to 24% max, because their green peas will come in a paper carton with a shrink wrap, in a cardboard packaging with a plastic wrapper and all that. So in municipal waste as such, the green pea shells and so on, which are left behind at the pea processing unit, do not come as household waste. So their packaging waste is so huge that they have only 16 to 24% organic waste, and all the waste is combustible. And over there, they are very careful not to mix debris and bricks and dust with their municipal waste. So the inerts content is also very low, and therefore their calorific value is around 6,500, 7,000, whereas ours is around 3,500 to 4 max in mixed waste. Also, when you do incineration, as I said, you get electricity after your superheated steam turns some turbines to make electricity. And all the rest is wasted heat, the superheated steam cooling, the heat of the burning, and so on. And in those cold climates, they really value the heat more than the electricity that comes out. In Denmark and so on, for instance, they are actually importing Polish waste just to heat their cities. And electricity, if any surplus is produced, is just a byproduct for them. This is not the case in a tropical country like India. We could use the heat for air conditioning, but we're not thinking along those lines at all. And we don't have central heating, central cooling of our cities, and so on. So if you do mass burning like an incinerator, what do you do with the mass heat that is produced? Another thing, the West is very particular about emission control, tighter and tighter and tighter. So the cost of emission control over there is 50%, if not more, of the cost of the actual incineration unit. And with tightening standards, the existing emission controls are inadequate. More investment would be required to improve them, because they are finding incidents of cancers and other diseases around the plants in the communities living near incinerators. So there's a big outcry. I think from the 90s, there have been no new incinerators in the US. The old ones are all being phased out. Europe is following. I can't offhand remember the dates on which the new incinerators have stopped coming. And they also have a stable population there and a stable amount of waste generated. So all the promoters of incineration plants, the ones who want to sell the units, they don't have a market now in the development world. So they're looking for, India or undeveloped countries to promote their technology. India has never spent a pie on waste disposal. This is because until the plastic age, all the waste went to the fields for composting. There was no need to spend anything for disposal. Now with mixed plastics and farmers not wanting mixed plastics and debris on their fields, we are getting these mountains of waste. But even then, municipalities have never spent any money or paid anybody to manage waste disposal. They only spend for collection and transport, and then dumping it at the nearest available outside of the city place that they can get away with. Whereas in the West, landfill tipping fees. That means a municipality has to pay $100 or more, maybe it's gone to $150 a ton now, for somebody to let them dump a ton of waste in their particular landfill or private land. So incinerator plants in the West also charge a tipping fee, but they tell cities, we won't charge you $100, we may charge you 80 or 75 or 70 to accept your waste. So that makes it more attractive for cities, which are not allowed to just randomly dump wherever they please. In India, with such a vast percentage of every city's population, 55 to 60% living in slums, and not paying property taxes because the society doesn't provide them homes and so on. There isn't that kind of money to pay for a municipality to pay tipping fees to a waste to energy plant. So they say, okay, don't worry, you just pay us double the price for the electricity we produce. And we need that extra money for the power to cover our costs. And we also need huge subsidies. At one time, 10 crores per megawatt from MNES and 15 crores per megawatt from IREDA and so on. And if you look at the value of those subsidies, for that cost, you could simply put up a thermal or a hydel plant with no subsidy. The subsidy would cover the entire cost per megawatt of conventional power, because the cost of incineration units are 200 to 400% higher than normal. So ultimately, who is paying for this? You, me, and all the tax-paying public, because GST goes up, this, that, for the government to be able to pay subsidies for these unviable technologies. And for the public to pay higher electricity bills because the electricity companies are forced to buy that proportion of high cost power. There was one plant in Bombay which sought the Maharashtra Electricity Regulatory Commission permission for setting the price for their power so that they could do a power purchase agreement before setting up their plant. And it was so high that Merck did a very innovative thing. They told the municipality, if you so desperately want this plant, then you pay for the higher electricity and you use it for your street lights and sewage plants and whatever else consumes energy. That was the end of that conversation, and the promoter just walked away.
So thank you for that, Almitra. But considering that you're clearly stating that they are not a very viable options for the kind of waste generated in our cities, why is it that municipalities are rushing to set them up in all our tier 1, tier 2 cities in the country?
Well, as I said, municipalities have never spent anything for disposal. I'm talking of early days, 2003, 4, 5, 6, when the talk of wet and dry and segregating your waste, even public awareness of it, let alone compliance with it, was almost zero. So all these foreign companies would come to a municipality and say, let us give you a waste to energy plant. You just give us some land on a 30 or 50-year lease. Don't pay us a pie. It won't cost you a penny. We will take care of all the costs. We'll get our money from subsidy and high power tariffs. So that suited municipalities fine. That is why when the Bombay municipality was told, if you like it so much, then you buy the high power yourself. Don't pass it on to consumers. And they immediately backed off because that's not what they wanted. They wanted to pass the buck of the high power to someone else.
So clearly, there is not just the financial non-viability. What are the other pros and cons that just do not make a case for waste to energy in our country?
Well, I forgot to mention the most important thing, that until a few years ago, India didn't have a single dioxin measuring instrument in the country. And when you burn PVC...
And if you could just decode dioxin for our listeners, many of them hear these terms, but they don't know.
Okay. Whenever you burn any chlorinated chlorine or fluorine or bromine or iodine containing substance, you generate the world's most toxic kind of element, which can enter the air, the water, and the soil. And the West has long since moved away from cheap and dirty PVC, polyvinyl chloride, which is almost 50% chlorine. So you don't get dioxins when you burn polythene or PET or polystyrene, but you do get dioxin, these very toxic gases called dioxins, and also furans, another cousin of them, which is extremely bad for human health. So that has been the cause of the ill health around incinerators abroad. That has been the reason for their tighter and tighter emission controls and moving away from PVC in use and throw items altogether, which we have been asking India to do, and it hasn't yet done it despite court directions. We still get shrimp, crab.
Yeah. And you're saying it's not easy to measure the levels of dioxins specifically in an area where a waste to energy plant is set up, or where there are certain emissions or pollution levels are high. It's not easy unless something is set up by the government.
Yeah. So first of all, even a dioxin testing lab to capture the flue gas at a waste to energy plant, trap it in a container, take the container to a dioxin lab, wait several days to get the results. It's sort of meaningless when the emission at that point in time is what we wanted to monitor and control. And if we are not serious about banning use and throw PVC, even the MNES says waste to energy plants should avoid PVC. If you read our MSW rules 2016, it says, avoid PVC in this, avoid PVC in that. You tell me, as a friend of waste pickers, how on earth can they pick out all the PVC stickers of price tags, all the PVC labels of bottles, all the PVC, caps and other small odd things? It's just not practical unless we mandate a ban on use and throw single-use PVC. It's okay for electrical conduits, floor and wall covering and so on.
So you've been telling us about dioxins and it's how it is so difficult to monitor from waste to energy plants. But what is the effect of dioxins on the population that's living around the waste to energy plant?
I think one can Google the exact medical outcomes, but by all accounts, it's extremely toxic and deadly. And it enters not only the air that we breathe around the plant, but it also goes into the ash, which is a reject from the incineration plants. And although the Western companies come and say, oh, you don't have to spend a pie on waste management, you don't have to break your head about segregation, we'll take all your mixed waste just as it is and make 95% of the volume disappear, you'll be left with 5% ash. That is not the case in India. The ash content from the 2-3 working waste to energy plants we have in Delhi, it's around 30%, and it's all just going and being dumped in Okhla on top of the regular municipal mixed waste dump. And dioxins can be controlled if you burn waste, including PVC, at very high temperatures and quickly quench the flue gases so that they come through that burning range, the dioxin forming range of 800 degrees very rapidly by cooling. That is why the rules recommend that you segregate, keep your waste unmixed so that you can manage everything. You can compost your food waste, you can recycle your dry waste, and the non-recyclables like multi-films and other things, if they go to cement plants, which have very tight emission control standards already installed, and they cool their flue gases rapidly. So the danger of dioxins is much less in a cement plant than an incinerator plant. And people may say, well, you do need an incineration unit somewhere for the non-recyclable combustibles. But all our cement plants have more than enough capacity to absorb all this, even as a 5% replacement of coal, let alone higher.
So you're saying that all the rejects of when a waste to energy plant is in operation, like dioxins, fly ash, the flue gases, and bottom ash, now they all have an impact, and they are an output which is created and needs to be taken care of very carefully so that they don't go back into our habitat or our food cycle. But is that what really happens?
Well, in the West, because of this potential hazard, they specify that the incinerator ash should go to a hazardous waste landfill. If you look at our country, there are hardly enough hazardous waste landfill accepting points in the country, and it's very expensive. These haz waste units, they also charge 150 rupees a kilo to accept waste into the high security lined landfill, and nobody's doing that. So coming to the Sukhdev Vihar Jindal plant you mentioned at the beginning, there 30% ash goes to the Okhla dump. And I've walked there and seen this ash being unloaded, and seeing that you find charred coconut shells, charred cloth. It all shows that the temperature of combustion is way below the 1200 degrees that incinerator is supposed to operate at. You will only get charred and recognizable waste like that if it's around 700-800 degrees, which is the dioxin forming thing. So all that dioxin is also just being dumped on the Okhla landfill. And if there's that much low temperature ash being dumped there, you can imagine how much dioxin is affecting all the Sukhdev Vihar residents. They're perfectly justified in objecting. Nobody's listening to their demand to remove it from the residential area, which I'm not sure who came up first, the residents or the plant. But either way, in our Supreme Court Committee for Solid Waste in 99, we recommended a 500-meter buffer zone around all waste processing sites. And that's a huge area, that's like a square kilometer. So no city wants to set aside that much within the city for safety reasons. And the Sukhdev Vihar has so many facilities quite within reach of the waste to energy plant.
But have you, in your lifetime of experience of working with waste, heard of really very well-run, successful waste to energy plants, either in India or in the West?
Well, we do not yet have a solution for sanitary waste, sanitary napkins, adult and children diapers, and so on, and infectious hospital waste, especially after COVID. All of that was being recommended for incineration to totally kill the viruses or germs, infection, and so on. These are units which operate with much smaller volume, 10-20 tons a day. So with atmospheric dilution, perhaps the health effects are not so noticeable. On waste to energy, we should talk perhaps separately about the biometh ones. The biometh ones also work very well at a small scale for market waste in Vijayawada, cow dung in Ludhiana, slaughterhouse waste in Medak, and so on. But Lucknow, which tried a major biomethanation unit as a waste to energy plant, costing 81 crores with a humongous subsidy also. On Christmas Day in 2004, the workers showed up and the officers and found the doors locked, and all the officers run away and the plant shut down secretly overnight because they were not getting good enough organic waste free of plastics and debris to even do biogas operations at the so many ton level. The reason for that is if a city really can give good clean market waste, there's enough people wanting it as animal feed, as fertilizer for their fields. So they pay the drivers, don't go to the Lucknow biometh plant, bring it to our fields and we'll pay you pocket money for that. So the plant never did get good enough organic waste.
Here you also, part of your court cases were, involved the issue of the waste to energy plant. But should we keep that for another session and today's chat with some lively experience or let's say anecdote of your journey with waste to energy, whether in court, outside court, or anywhere else, or a story you have to share?
I don't know if I want this upfront. A friend of mine overheard because of the court case where I was taking the MNES head on and opposing waste to energy, which was their money-making cash cow, promoting it like mad for foreign promoters with foreign trips thrown in and all that. There was one municipal commissioner who was invited to Australia to see the supposedly hugely successful waste to energy plant over there. So they offered him an all expenses paid trip and he went there. And the next day when they were to visit the plant, they said, oh, the weather is too bad. We'll forget about it. We'll give you a PPT presentation in our office. And they put him back on the plane to India. And he came back telling his officers, they just took me there for nothing. So that's how serious they are, because they don't really have anything to show. And when I was actively pursuing the court case, which we'll talk about the next time, I did it very consciously, telling the family, don't be surprised if I get death threats or something like that. And there was a friend of mine who happened to be in the MNES office and overheard one officer telling another, let's go to the Supreme Court and tell them that Almitra has been purchased by compost companies to promote composting at the expense of waste to energy, because she went at one company's expense to visit a new compost plant in Ludhiana from Delhi. They took me along. It's a fact, they paid for my flight or car, I can't remember what. But luckily there was another officer in that room who said, I don't think you should do that. It won't go down well with the court. Yeah. So I got away with that. We'll talk about the case, which is a whole story in itself, or 2 stories or 3 stories.
Yes, I think we shall save it for another day. All the exciting stories inside the courtroom and outside, and what are the outcomes and how they have impacted our solid waste management rules, and the stories that are following and are currently happening in us. So, well, all that for later, for next time. Thank you so much for today, for all the lovely stories, information, and you make it so easy to understand. I think that is the most beautiful part. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.